The explosion ripped through the Spanish colonial mansion at exactly 3:47 in the afternoon. Windows shattered across the 20-square-kilometer estate. Concrete dinosaurs stood, silent witness, as flames consumed the hunger housing, Pablo Escobar's collection of antique automobiles. This wasn't a government raid. This was Los Pepes, a vigilante death squad, sending a message to the most powerful drug trafficker on earth. But they were bombing the wrong property. Hacienda Nápoles, Pablo Escobar's favorite playground and the crown jewel of his billion-dollar empire, sat 150 kilometers east of Medellin, untouched and thriving. Inside its gates, 4 hippopotamuses wallowed in artificial lakes while cocaine-laden planes landed on private runways. The estate had cost him $57 million in 1983 money, and within those 7.7 square miles of Colombian countryside, Escobar had built something that would outlive him by decades. The Hippos would see to that. Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria was born on December 1st, 1949 in Rio Negro, Antioquia Department, Colombia. His father was a small farmer. His mother was a teacher. He grew up poor in Medellin, and by age 17, he dropped out of high school to work the streets with his cousin Gustavo Gaviria. They stole tombstones from cemeteries, sandblasted off the names, and resold them. They forged high school diplomas. They stole cars. But Escobar had bigger ambitions. He wanted to study criminal law. He wanted to enter politics. He wanted to become president of Colombia. What he became instead was the richest criminal in human history. By the mid-1970s, Escobar had moved from petty crime into cocaine trafficking, working alongside the Ocho brothers, Carlos Lehter and Gonzalo Rodriguez Gacha, to create what would become known as the Medellin cartel. They weren't a monolithic organization like the movies suggest. They were 5 or more separate trafficking organizations that cooperated when advantageous. Escobar's innovation was in logistics. He figured out how to hide cocaine in airplane tiras. He paid pilots up to $500,000 per day to fly product from Bolivia and Peru to his jungle processing labs. From there, the cocaine went to the United States, and by the early 1980s, the Medellin operations controlled 80% of the American cocaine market. The money was staggering beyond comprehension. At the height of his power in the mid-1980s, Escobar's organization was bringing in $420 million per week. That's $22 billion per year. To put that in perspective, Colombia's entire GDP in the 80s was around $35 billion. Escobar personally received roughly 40% of the cartel's profits. Forbes magazine added him to their inaugural World's Billionaire list in 1987, conservatively estimating his personal net worth at over $2 billion. He would remain on that list for 7 consecutive years. By 1989, Forbes ranked him as the 7th wealthiest person on Earth. His actual net worth was likely closer to $30 billion, which would be approximately $80 billion in today's money. He employed 10 accountants just to help launder the cash. He spent $2,500 per month on rubber bands to bundle $100 bills. He stored cash in walls, basements, and buried in fields across Colombia. His brother Roberto later estimated that they lost approximately 10% of their wealth annually, roughly $2.1 billion, because rats ate the money, moisture destroyed it, or they simply forgot where they'd hidden it. On one occasion, while fleeing authorities in the mountains, Escobar burned $2 million in cash just to keep his daughter Manuela warm during a cold night. In 1978, when Escobar was still in his 20s but already extraordinarily wealthy, he purchased a 7.7 square mile tract of land in Puerto Triunfo, Antioquia Department, approximately 93 miles east of Medellin and 155 miles northwest of Bogotá. The location was strategic. It sat halfway between Colombia's 2 largest cities, positioned perfectly on the main highway. It was close enough to Medellin for quick helicopter access, but far enough away to provide privacy and security. The property had previously been a conventional hacienda used for agriculture and cattle ranching. Escobar paid what seemed at the time like a modest sum for the land itself, but over the next several years, through forced purchases and coercion, he acquired surrounding smaller properties until he controlled approximately 3,000 hectares under a single name. The property valuation he declared in 1983 was 4,500,000,000 Colombian pesos, equivalent to 57 million United States dollars at that exchange rate. But that figure only represented the land value. What Escobar built on that land would cost tens of millions more. He named it Hacienda Nápoles, after the Italian city of Naples, reportedly inspired by a trip to Europe. The name evoked old-world grandeur, European sophistication, the kind of cultural legitimacy that a tombstone thief from Medellin could never claim by birth but might purchase with cocaine billions. Escobar renovated the existing Spanish colonial-style house into an opulent mansion and then surrounded it with infrastructure that rivaled small cities. He built internal roads connecting the property's various zones. He constructed 27 artificial lakes stocked with fish. He installed 6 Olympic-sized swimming pools, including one with a replica of Victoria Falls, complete with cascading waterfalls. He built a soccer field that doubled as a heliport. He constructed a full-size bullring, though it never saw an actual bullfight. Instead, according to some accounts, Escobar used it for target practice, machine gunning bulls for entertainment. He built a go-kart racing track and accumulated a massive collection of vintage and luxury automobiles. He installed his own gas station on the property. Most importantly, he built a private airstrip capable of landing small planes and position at multiple helipads across the estate. But the crown jewel of Hacienda Nápoles, the feature that would define its legacy long after Escobar's death, was the zoo. This wasn't some modest collection of local animals. Escobar wanted the most extravagant private menagerie in South America, possibly the world. He illegally imported exotic animals from multiple continents. Elephants arrived from Africa and Asia. Giraffes came in massive transport crates. He brought in antelopes, zebras, ostriches, exotic birds from the Himalayas, ponies, horses, and rhinoceroses. The zoo eventually housed over 1,200 exotic animals. Local families were invited to visit for free on weekends. A calculated public relations move that helped cement Escobar's Robin Hood image among Medellin's poor. But 4 animals in particular would prove to be Escobar's most enduring legacy. Sometime in the early 1980s, he illegally smuggled in 3 female hippopotamuses and 1 male from a zoo in California. The male would later be named El Viejo, which means the old one. These 4 hippos cost a fortune to transport and required their own artificial lakes with specially designed habitats. They were, even by drug lord standards, an absurd indulgence. At the entrance to the estate, Escobar mounted a full-scale replica of a Piper PA-11 Super Cub airplane atop a blue and white arch. The plane bore the tail number HK Altuzania de P. This was meant to be a replica of the aircraft used to fly his first major cocaine shipment to the United States, though in one interview, Escobar admitted the original plane had been lost at sea with a drug shipment. Still, the symbolism was unmistakable. Everyone who passed under that arch knew exactly how Pablo Escobar had earned his fortune, and he wanted them to know. This wasn't discretion. This was a monument to criminality. A middle finger raised to every law enforcement agency in the Western Hemisphere. He even placed life-size concrete sculptures of dinosaurs throughout the grounds, creating a bizarre Jurassic Park aesthetic that his young son, Juan Pablo, reportedly loved. The whole estate cost him, by conservative estimates, well over $100 million to develop and maintain. During the early 1980s, Hacienda Nápoles became Escobar's primary residence and the unofficial headquarters of Medellin cartel operations. The estate hosted meetings between cartel leaders, including the Ochoa brothers and Gonzalo Rodriguez Gacha, known as the Mexican. Important political figures visited the property. Celebrities arrived via the private airstrip. Escobar flew in actors, musicians, journalists, and sporting stars, showing off his zoo and his wealth while carefully cultivating his public image. Behind closed doors, the estate functioned as a cocaine command center. Business discussions happened poolside. Cartel lieutenants reported weekly income figures in rooms stacked with bundled cash. The private airport saw frequent traffic. Small planes landed every Tuesday and Thursday, carrying coca paste from northern processing facilities. Cocaine left the estate bound for the United States and Europe. Money came back in duffel bags and reinforced cases. The monthly operating costs for Hacienda Nápoles during its peak years ran into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Staff salaries, animal care, maintenance, security, and bribes to local officials all required constant cash flow. But for Escobar, who was earning approximately $60 million per week from his share of cartel profits, these expenses were negligible. The estate also functioned as Escobar's pleasure palace, far from the watchful eye of his wife Maria Victoria Henao, who primarily resided in their home in Medellin's affluent Poblado neighborhood. Multiple accounts suggest that Escobar used Hacienda Nápoles for extramarital affairs, according to depictions in Colombian television miniseries, which drew from interviews with former associates. Escobar allegedly flew in Brazilian prostitutes to party at the estate while his wife remained in Medellin. He hosted lavish parties featuring hundreds of guests, free-flowing champagne, and entertainment that lasted for days. The Spanish colonial mansion was described by some as resembling a cross between a cocaine palace and the Playboy mansion. The estate included a brothel among its facilities, though details about its operations remain largely unconfirmed in public records. What is certain is that the 4-hour drive from Medellin provided Escobar with the distance he needed to maintain both his family image in the city and his hedonistic lifestyle in the countryside. He could land at the private airstrip after meetings in Medellin, walk past his concrete dinosaurs, decide whether he wanted to swim in one of 6 pools, or watch his hippos wallow in the lakes, and disappear into a world entirely of his own creation. In 1982, Escobar's political ambitions briefly came to fruition. He was elected as an alternate member of Colombia's Chamber of Representatives, a position that came with parliamentary immunity. He used his newfound political platform to channel funds into housing and public works projects in Medellin's poorest neighborhoods, further enhancing his Robin Hood reputation. Poor families received new homes. Soccer fields appeared in barrios that previously had nothing. Community centers opened with Escobar's funding. Thousands of people in Medellin genuinely loved him, viewing him as a benefactor who cared about their welfare in ways the Colombian government never had. But his political career was short-lived. In the mid-1983, Justice Minister Rodrigo Lara Bonilla publicly denounced Escobar as a drug trafficker during a congressional session. The exposure was devastating. Escobar was forced to resign from his political position. His carefully constructed facade of respectability crumbled. In April 1984, assassins working for the Medellin cartel murdered Lara Bonilla, gunning him down in his car in Bogotá. The assassination marked a decisive turning point in Colombian history and the beginning of Escobar's long war against the state. The Colombian government, now under intense pressure from the United States, launched an aggressive crackdown on the Medellin cartel. In May 1984, a joint operation involving the DEA and Colombian police raided Hacienda Nápoles. They arrived with helicopters and armored vehicles. Soldiers swarmed the property, photographing the zoo, the airstrip, the pools, and the dinosaur sculptures. They documented everything but found Escobar gone. He'd received advance warning, likely from corrupt officials on his payroll, and fled before the raid commenced. The soldiers posed for photographs with the elephants, the hippos, and the rhinoceroses. These images would later circulate in Colombian newspapers, showing the public for the first time the scale of Escobar's excess. But despite the raid's publicity value, accomplished little. No major arrests were made. No significant cocaine seizures occurred. Escobar simply abandoned Hacienda Nápoles and moved his operations elsewhere. From May 1984 onward, Escobar could no longer live openly at his beloved estate. He became a fugitive, moving between safe houses across Colombia. He continued operating the Medellin cartel from the shadows, but Hacienda Nápoles sat largely empty, maintained by skeleton crews of staff who fed the animals and kept the grounds from total deterioration. Escobar still visited occasionally, arriving and departing via helicopter under cover of darkness. But the era of lavish parties and open hosting of cartel meetings had ended. The estate became a symbol of what Escobar had lost: the ability to enjoy his wealth publicly. Over the next several years, his situation only worsened. He launched a campaign of narco-terrorism against the Colombian state, bombing government buildings, assassinating politicians, judges, and police officers, and terrorizing the public with indiscriminate violence. By 1989, Colombia was effectively at war with the Medellin cartel. Desperate to end the violence, the Colombian government offered Escobar a deal in 1981. If he surrendered voluntarily and agreed not to contest extradition to the United States, he could serve his sentence in a specially constructed prison called La Catedral, which he would effectively control. Escobar accepted. La Catedral was built on a hilltop near Medellin, complete with a soccer field, jacuzzis, a bar, and a waterfall. It was less a prison than a luxury compound where Escobar continued running cartel operations while technically incarcerated. But in July 1992, when the government attempted to transfer him to a real prison after he murdered 2 associates inside La Catedral, Escobar simply walked out. He escaped custody and went into hiding, sparking a 16-month manhunt that would involve the Colombian National Police's search block, the DEA, the CIA, and a vigilant death squad called Los Pepes, which stood for Perseguidos por Pablo Escobar, or People Persecuted by Pablo Escobar. Los Pepes was funded by the rival Cali cartel and allegedly included former Medellin cartel members who'd turned against Escobar. They systematically targeted his organization, killing associates, bombing his properties, and terrorizing his family. In January 1983, Los Pepes bombed La Manuela, Escobar's La Queste, estate in Guatapé using approximately 200 kilograms of TNT explosives. The mansion, which Escobar had named after his daughter Manuela, was obliterated. Escobar received a tip-off and escaped minutes before the explosion, but his empire was crumbling. His wealth couldn't protect him anymore. By late 1993, he was essentially alone, moving between safe houses. In Medellin, with only one remaining bodyguard, Álvaro de Jesus Agudelo, nicknamed El Limón. On December 1st, 1993, Pablo Escobar celebrated his 44th birthday in hiding. The next day, December 2nd, he made a fatal mistake. Desperate to communicate with his family, he placed a phone call to his son Juan Pablo from a middle-class house in the Los Olivos neighborhood of Medellin. He'd been careful in recent weeks, keeping calls under 2 minutes to avoid triangulation. But on this call he spoke for too long. Colombian electronic surveillance teams, using technology provided by the United States, triangulated his exact location. Search block officers immediately mobilized. Within minutes they surrounded the house. Escobar and El Limón heard the commotion and tried to escape through a back window. They climbed onto the roof. As Escobar ran barefoot across the terracotta tiles, officers opened fire. Multiple bullets struck him in the torso and feet. A final shot hit him in the head. Pablo Escobar died on that rooftop at approximately 3 in the afternoon. His family would later claim he'd shot himself through the ear, his signature execution method, rather than allow capture. But the official account states he was shot by search block. The exact truth of who fired the fatal shot has never been definitively established. What matters is that Pablo Escobar, the richest criminal in history, ended his life running across a suburban rooftop, brought down by a phone call to his son. His death sparked immediate celebration across Colombia and beyond. But it also triggered chaos. The Medellin cartel fragmented repeatedly. Rival factions fought for control of remaining operations. Properties were seized or abandoned, and Hacienda Nápoles, already largely empty since 1984, entered a period of complete abandonment and decay. The Colombian government initiated asset forfeiture proceedings against all of Escobar's properties. Hacienda Nápoles was formally seized by the state and placed under control of government agencies tasked with managing confiscated narco assets. Escobar's family attempted to challenge the seizure in court, claiming ownership rights, but the government prevailed. The property, valued at approximately $2.2 million at the time of seizure, passed entirely into state hands, but nobody knew what to do with it. The estate sat empty for years. Local residents and treasure hunters invaded the property, tearing apart buildings, in search of hidden cash they believed Escobar had buried. The main house was gutted. Holes were smashed through walls. Floors were torn up, pools filled with debris. The once immaculate grounds became overgrown jungle. The exotic animals presented an even more complex problem. Most of them had died from neglect or starvation in the months following Escobar's death. Environmental authorities relocated surviving elephants, giraffes, and ostriches to proper zoos across Colombia. But the 4 hippopotamuses proved impossible to capture. Hippos are enormous, aggressive, territorial animals that can weigh up to 4.5 tons. They're also extremely dangerous. In Africa, hippos kill approximately 500 people per year, more than lions, crocodiles, and sharks combined. The Colombian government simply didn't have the resources or expertise to tranquilize and transport adult hippos, so officials made the expedient decision to leave them on the property. The hippos were deemed too difficult to move. They'd be fine in their artificial lakes. They'd probably die out eventually without proper care. This assumption proved catastrophically wrong. The 4 hippos not only survived, they thrived. The Magdalena River Valley provided an ideal habitat. The climate was warm year-round, with no dry season like in Africa that naturally limits hippo populations. Food was abundant. And most critically, the hippos had no natural predators, no lions, no hyenas, no crocodiles. They began breeding almost immediately. By 2007, only 14 years after Escobar's death, the population had grown to 16 animals. The hippos had also escaped their enclosures and begun spreading into the Magdalena River and surrounding waterways. By 2011, environmental authorities estimated at least 30 hippos roaming the Colombian countryside. By 2014, the count exceeded 40. By 2018, researchers estimated between 50 and 60 hippos. By 2021, the official count reached approximately 80. As of November 2023, Colombia's environment minister announced that 169 hippos descended from Escobar's original 4 now inhabited the Magdalena River basin, making it the largest population of hippos anywhere outside of Africa. The hippos had evolved to reach sexual maturity faster than their African counterparts. In Africa, hippos typically don't breed until 9 to 11 years old. In Colombia, some were breeding as young as 3 years old. The population was growing at approximately 6% annually. Scientists projected that without intervention, the population could reach 1,000 hippos by 2035. The ecological impact has been severe. This waste contaminates rivers, altering water chemistry and killing fish, turtles, and other aquatic species. The hippos compete with native species like manatees and otters for resources. They consume massive amounts of vegetation, changing entire ecosystems. They've become what biologists call ecosystem engineers, fundamentally altering their environment in ways that can take decades or centuries to reverse. The Colombian government officially declared hippos uninvasive alien species in March 2022. But by then, the problem had become so enormous that no easy solution existed. Sterilization programs were launched, with each sterilization costing approximately $9,800 per animal and requiring dangerous capture operations. Plans emerged to relocate some hippos to sanctuaries in Mexico and India, but the estimated cost was $3.5 million. Some scientists advocated for euthanasia, as the only realistic option to control the population. But public opinion was sharply divided. Many Colombians, particularly those in the tourism industry, had grown fond of the cocaine hippos, as they'd been nicknamed. The hippos had become a bizarre tourist attraction, drawing visitors from around the world who wanted to see the legacy of Pablo Escobar roaming free. American animal rights activists even launched a Save the Hippos campaign, further complicating government efforts to manage the crisis. While the hippo population exploded, the rest of Hacienda Nápoles underwent a dramatic transformation. In 2006, 13 years after Escobar's death, the Colombian government officially took full control of the property and began exploring options for its future use. By 2007, the government partnered with a private management company to develop the estate into a commercial theme park. The goal was explicit: turn this symbol of narco-terrorism into a family-friendly tourist destination while simultaneously providing an anti-drug education message. They named it Parque Temático Hacienda Nápoles. Development began in 2008. The private airstrip was converted into a water park complete with enormous slides and wave pools. The old airplane hangar became a museum exhibiting Escobar's burnt car collection, vehicles that had been damaged when the Cali cartel bombed his Monaco building in Medellin. The estate's artificial lakes were incorporated into a safari-style attraction, where visitors could view zebras, lions, leopards, elephants, and other African animals. They built a butterfly vivarium, an African cultural museum, and multiple family-friendly attractions, including a Jurassic Adventure zone featuring the original concrete dinosaur sculptures Escobar had built for his son. The centerpiece of the marketing campaign became Vanessa, a female hippo who'd been hand-raised by park staff from birth and had become habituated to human presence. Vanessa was designated the park's official mascot. Visitors could watch her emerge from a pond and feed her raw carrots. Children screamed her name to get her attention, and remarkably, she often responded, approaching viewing platforms where tourists photographed her massive jaws and gigantic body. The original entrance gate with Escobar's plane replica was relocated to a museum area. They stripped the plane of its original cocaine-symboling symbolism by painting it with cheerful zebra stripes. Most controversially, the park operators established the Memorial Museum, a sobering exhibition that used black and white photographs and information boards to chronicle Escobar's crimes, the violence of the cocaine wars, and the thousands of victims who died during his reign of terror. The museum attempted to provide educational context, honoring victims rather than glorifying the drug lord. But the reality was undeniable. People weren't visiting Hacienda Nápoles to mourn Escobar's victims. They were visiting because of him. The remains of Escobar's main house became one of the park's most popular attractions. After treasure hunters had gutted the structure and locals had torn it apart, searching for hidden cash, little remained except crumbling walls and empty rooms. In February 2015, sections of the house partially collapsed due to structural instability and lack of maintenance. For safety reasons, authorities demolished what remained, though ruins of the foundation and some walls were left standing as historical markers. Visitors could walk through the skeleton of what had once been Escobar's sanctuary, imagining the parties and cartel meetings that had occurred there. The burned car collection drew particular fascination. These vintage automobiles had been stored in a garage at one of Escobar's Medellin properties when the Cali cartel bombed the building in the early 1990s. The charred, rusted vehicles were transported to Hacienda Nápoles and displayed in their destroyed state as testament to the violence of the Narco wars. Tourists photographed the wreckage, touching the twisted metal that had once represented Escobar's wealth. The park opened to the public with ticket prices ranging from 32,000 to 65,000 Colombian pesos, approximately 12 to 21 United States dollars. Visitors arrived by the thousands, primarily Colombian families on weekend trips, but also international tourists drawn by Escobar's infamous legacy. The park operators claimed it had become the largest theme park in South America, attracting over 1 million visitors since its 2008 opening. Hotels and restaurants sprouted in the nearby town of Doradel to accommodate the tourist influx. The Colombian government hailed the transformation as a triumph of public rehabilitation, taking a symbol of violence and turning it into an economic engine for a struggling rural region. But underneath the water slides and safari tours, Escobar's presence remained impossible to erase. Park staff were instructed not to answer questions about the former owner, yet every feature of the estate existed because of him. The hippos were his hippos. The dinosaurs were his dinosaurs. The airplane was his airplane. The entire economy now depended on narco-tourism, a phenomenon that many Colombians found deeply troubling. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Pablo Escobar had spent $57 million in 1983 creating Hacienda Nápoles as his private paradise, a place where he could be king of his own kingdom, free from the constraints of law or morality or consequence. Haid imported exotic animals, built private airports, hosted parties that lasted for days, and used the estate as the nerve center of a global cocaine empire that terrorized 2 continents. Haid believed his wealth would protect him forever. But, less than 10 years after he purchased the property, he was forced to flee, never to return. 30 years after his death, his beloved estate had been stripped of his name and reconstituted as a children's theme park. His mansion was rubble. His car collection was burned scrap metal. His airplane had zebra stripes painted on it. And the only living legacy he left behind was an ecological disaster in the form of 169 hippopotamuses that the Colombian government had no idea how to eliminate. The joke, in the end, was on Escobar himself. He'd wanted to create something permanent, something that would make him immortal. And he'd succeed, just not in the way he'd intended. He'd become a cautionary tale told at water parks. In 2025, visitors to Parque Temático Hacienda Nápoles ride giant octopus-shaped water slides, view exotic African animals in safari enclosures, and learn about Pablo Escobar's crimes in the Memorial Museum. They can stand at the ruins of his house and take selfies. They can feed carrots to Vanessa the hippo while their children play on inflatable bounce houses. On any given weekend, thousands of Colombian families fill the grounds, laughing and swimming, and enjoying themselves in a place that once housed meetings where cartel leaders discussed which politicians to assassinate and which officials to bribe. The contrast is surreal. The transformation is complete. But everywhere you look, traces of the original purpose remain. The artificial lakes were built to house smuggled hippos. The private airstrip was built to land cocaine shipments. The enormous grounds were purchased with drug money. Every single element of the park exists because in 1978, a young cocaine trafficker named Pablo Escobar decided he wanted to build paradise. The cocaine hippos continue to multiply. Colombian officials continue to debate whether sterilization, relocation, or euthanasia represents the best solution to control the population. Meanwhile, the hippos keep breeding, keep spreading, keep altering the ecosystem in ways that will impact Colombia for generations. Some of them have traveled nearly 100 miles from the original property, expanding their territory along the Magdalena River. They attack fishermen who venture too close. In 2021, a man named John Aristides was fishing when a hippo grasped his head in its jaws, bit his arm, and threw him several meters through the air. He survived, but the incident served as a reminder that these animals are not benign. They're 3-ton aquatic apex predators with no fear of humans. And there are now 169 of them roaming freely through Colombian waterways because Pablo Escobar wanted to impress visitors to his private zoo in the 1980s. The hippos are Escobar's final laugh. His middle finger from beyond the grave to the Colombian government that killed him. They're proof that some consequences can't be erased, no matter how many water slides you build. Today, if you visit Hacienda Nápoles, you'll drive through a long, winding entrance road lined with large model animals, including a bright pink hippo statue. You'll pass through gates into a sprawling entertainment complex that feels disconnected from its dark history. You'll see families enjoying themselves, completely unaware or unconcerned that they're recreating at a former narco-terrorist headquarters. And maybe that's appropriate. Maybe the best revenge against Pablo Escobar isn't to preserve his memory, but to erase it. to turn his kingdom into a place where children play and families laugh. Or maybe it's more complicated than that. Maybe we should remember what happened here. Maybe we should acknowledge that this land was purchased with blood money, that the zoo was built with cocaine profits, that thousands of people died to make Pablo Escobar wealthy enough to import hippopotamuses from California. Maybe the Memorial Museum, with its photographs of victims and its timeline of violence, serves a purpose beyond tourism. Maybe we need these reminders of what happens when criminality goes unchecked, when one man's ego and greed are allowed to metastasize into a multinational empire of death. In the end, Hacienda Nápoles stands as a monument to contradiction. It's a theme park built on a graveyard. It's a family-friendly destination with a genocidal history. It's an ecological disaster zone, masquerading as a safari adventure. It's everything Pablo Escobar wanted it to be, and nothing he intended. He spent $100 million creating paradise, and left behind an invasive species problem that Colombia will be dealing with for the next 50 years. That's his legacy. Not the wealth, not the power, not the Robin Hood mythology, or the Netflix series, or the tourist attractions. His legacy is 169 hippopotamuses that shouldn't exist, reproducing in rivers where they don't belong, fundamentally altering ecosystems in ways we're still trying to understand. Pablo Escobar wanted to be remembered. He wanted to matter. He wanted to leave his mark on history, and he did. He left hippos, cocaine hippos, multiplying at 6% per year, killing fishermen, contaminating rivers, impossible to eliminate, and in a strange, darkly poetic way. That seems fitting, because Escobar himself was impossible to eliminate, at least while he was alive. He bribed his way out of arrests. He built his own prison when the government tried to incarcerate him. He escaped custody and evaded the largest manhunt in Colombian history for 16 months. But eventually, inevitably, he ran out of places to hide. Eventually, the phone call went too long. Eventually, the bullets found him on that rooftop, and the empire he'd built collapsed within days. The money vanished. The properties were seized. The organizations fragmented. Everything he'd worked for disappeared except the hippos. The hippos remained. So if you visit Hacienda Nápoles today, pay attention to Vanessa. Watch her emerge from the pond. Notice how she's habituated to human presence, how she approaches the viewing platform without fear, how children scream her name and she responds. That's what happens when you remove an apex predator from its natural environment and place it somewhere with no consequences. It adapts, it thrives, it multiplies beyond control. Sound familiar? Pablo Escobar was removed from his environment, the streets of Medellin where poverty and desperation might have kept him in check, and placed in an environment with no consequences, a world where billions of dollars in cocaine money could buy anything, anyone, any outcome. And like the hippos, he adapted, he thrived, he multiplied his power and influence beyond any reasonable control. The hippos are his mirror. They're what he became. They're what he unleashed on Colombia, and they're what remains, long after the man himself has been forgotten. Somewhere in the Magdalena River Valley right now, a baby hippo is being born, a direct descendant of the four animals Pablo Escobar smuggled into Colombia 40 years ago. That baby hippo will grow to weigh 3 tons. It will have no natural predators. It will breed and produce more hippos, and those hippos will breed and produce more hippos. And on, exponentially, unstoppably, until someone finally figures out how to end what Pablo Escobar started, if they ever do, because some consequences, once set in motion, become impossible to reverse. Some empires, even after they fall, leave behind seeds that keep growing, keep spreading, keep causing damage long after the emperor is dead. That's the real story of Hacienda Nápoles, not the water slides. Not the theme park, not the family fun. The real story is that evil, once planted, takes root deeper than we imagine. And sometimes, no matter how many years pass, no matter how many governments try to erase it, no matter how many cheerful paint jobs we apply to the surface, that evil remains underneath, multiplying in the dark, waiting to resurface. Pablo Escobar is dead, but his hippos are not. And that matters more than we'd like to admit.